Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bianca Collins. I'm the curator of public programs for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. Thank you for joining us today or tonight, depending on where it is you're tuning in from around the world. The Fowler is honored to present today's program, Contemporary Congolese Artists and Memory, as part of our Lunch and Learn series of programs, which offer easily digestible explorations of charismatic objects from around the world. We're so pleased that you've joined us to chew on some sustenance and feed your mind and soul. In a recent conversation with UCLA students about her photographic series, Imaginary Trip, currently on view at the Fowler, artist Gosette Lubondo explained that Congolese people are always thinking about memory. While this may not be unique to those from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, it is the case that many Congolese artists today are investigating collective and personal memories. Today, we are joined by co-curator of the exhibition, Elaine Ericksen Sullivan, who will consider Lubondo's photography alongside the work of other contemporary Congolese artists who delve into local histories. Elaine Ericksen Sullivan is co-curator of Gosette Lubondo, Imaginary Trip, and the Andrew W. Mellon postdoctoral curatorial fellow for the arts of Sub-Saharan Africa at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She received her PhD in 2020 from the interdisciplinary department of the World Arts and Cultures Dance at UCLA. Her research focuses on both historical and contemporary arts from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Before we get going, I just have a few quick technical bits of housekeeping. Once the screen sharing begins, I encourage you to click View Options and then select side-by-side mode so the video feed doesn't cover any of the presentation. And if you have any questions during this program, please do submit them through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote entries that you would like to be considered to be answered at the end of the program. All right, that's all from me. Over to you, Elaine.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining me on this Lunch and Learn. So I'm coming to you from Manhattan, which is the ancestral homeland of the Lenape peoples who were violently displaced over the course of the last 400 years. And it's presently a city with one of the largest urban Native American populations in the US. It is most definitely a loud and busy city, so apologies in advance for the big city ambient noise. In the spirit of lunch, today I will be giving you a little taste of artwork by contemporary artists from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Using Gosette Lubondo's series, Imaginary Trip, as a jumping off point, I will be sharing with you the work of some artists who address very similar themes to those found in Imaginary Trip, namely the personal and collective memories grounded in Congolese experience. In case you've not had the opportunity to see the exhibition in person, let me provide you with a brief introduction. The artist, Gosette Lubondo, is a Kinshasa-based photographer born in 1993. She studied at Kinshasa's Académie des Beaux-Arts and has been featured in exhibitions on at least 3 continents, with the Fowler's exhibition being her first solo museum show. Imaginary Trip has 2 parts, Series 1 and Series 2. Series 1 takes place almost entirely in an abandoned train car. Throughout the images in the first series, Lubondo features herself, dressed as a multitude of characters one might encounter on a train. Series 2 takes place at a nearly, but not entirely, abandoned school in the province or region of Lower Congo. The figure in a red dress who opens Series 1 returns. This character is named Elikia, which means hope in Lingala. She guides viewers on a journey across the school campus and across past, present, and future. Both the school and the train car are vestiges of the colonial era, which also bear witness to the post-colonial period leading up to today. While for many a train car might just be a way to get from point A to point B, a train car in the main train station of Kinshasa is also a reminder of the very first years of Belgian involvement in what was then the Congo Free State. If you're like me and you're a map person, here is a map of the drainage basin of the Congo River. You can see that the distance between Kinshasa and Matadi is relatively short compared to the vast size of the Greater Congo Basin, where ivory and rubber were harvested in massive quantities in the colonial period and could mostly be transported by river. But between what is now Kinshasa and the Atlantic-connected port of Matadi, there was approximately 200 miles of extremely steep rapids and gorges. In the initial years of colonization, these miles were slowly traversed by porters, and building a rail line became the #1 priority. The conditions were horrendous. Almost 2,000 people died during its construction, and many fled to nearby villages. Trains in Congo are also reminders of this history. For series 2, Lubondo chose what is now the ITP Gombe Matadi School, founded in 1936 as the Central School by Brother Adrian of the Congregation of the Brothers of Christian Schools. While railroads helped extract wealth bound for Europe and especially Belgium, Christian schools trained colonial subjects in Christian ways of life. As the 20th century wore on and more Congolese moved to cities in search of work, less students came to school. In addition, religious schools were nationalized and chapels turned into assembly halls. In a school which once served 500 students, only a few now attend classes. Traces of these former students can be seen on the chalkboard and in the graffiti on the walls. But whereas I reacted to the graffiti on the walls as a kind of expected symbol of an abandoned building, a student from Kinshasa's Académie des Beaux-Arts, with whom we partnered to work with current art students, had a different reaction. This student, Umbafumoya Chomba Stamili, wrote a label now on the wall at the Fowler. She explained that for her, the graffiti reminded her of what she called the time of the ancestors, when the act of writing a name was done to communicate across time. In the photos of series 2, Lubondo evokes these earlier students through the semi-transparent figures inhabiting the scenes. Lubondo has emphasized that these are not ghosts, and they are not necessarily from the past, but they could also possibly be coming from the future. She suggests the possibilities and the imaginaries of past, present, and future. Lubondo's investigation of pasts through colonial landscapes share inspiration with artists of a slightly older generation, whom I will turn to now. Crossing Congo, we arrive in Lubumbashi, the hometown of Sami Baloji, who was born there in 1978. Today, I will share with you one of his earliest works, titled Mémoire from 2006. In this series of 30 photographs, only a few of which I'll be able to share with you today, Baloji created photo montages with his own photographs and those from the archive of the colonial era Belgian mining company, Union Minière du Haut-Katanga. Here you can see Baloji's 21st century photographs of the mine serve as a background for the black and white photos of mine employees taken about 75 years earlier. The Union Minière du Haut-Katanga and its mines became a defining presence in the Katanga region of Southeast DRC, still known as a global mining powerhouse. The city of Lubumbashi, which is now the second largest city in Congo, was founded because it was next to a mine. The city's most recognizable feature is the slag heap, which Baloji photographed close up in these photos. Baloji's collage reminds us of the Congolese labor and oppressive circumstances that went into creating the wealth produced by the mines. Looking closely at this photo, for example, we see the man standing in the striped shirt wears a chain around his neck. In the background, another man supervises. His uniform is that worn by those of the Force Publique, which was the colonial armed forces. A similarly uniformed soldier is seen in the foreground here, in what looks like a performance of bureaucracy and officialdom, set against a backdrop of a train car loading station. We are reminded again of the crucial role played by rail in the extraction of Congo's resources. Balogi does not keep us in the 1920s and 30s with his archival photographs, however. In this photo, one can easily identify Mobutu in his leopard print hat. It was under Mobutu's leadership in the second half of the 20th century that the mines were nationalized, and the Union Minière du Haut-Katanga became Gécamines. The company's fortunes were tied to copper prices, almost collapsing in the 1970s and booming in the 1980s. The company almost collapsed again in the 1990s, but that time was more due to mismanagement and political turmoil. These changing fortunes were not just numbers on a graph, but deeply affected Congolese across the region. People lost their jobs, and the economic crisis worsened tensions, which led to many fleeing the city that they had moved to for work. To live in Lubumbashi is to live in a company town. When I first visited Lubumbashi in 2013, I could not have cared less about mining copper or cobalt. But within a week, I could tell when copper prices were up or down, seemingly by osmosis. Balogi's photographs give the impression of empty industrial ruins. As in Lubondo's imaginary trip, the dilapidated infrastructure is inhabited by characters inserted into the scene by the artist. Whereas Lubondo nods to the past with clothing and with the creation of partially transparent spectral figures, Balogi uses archival photographs. He seems to bring the mind to life with figures from the past whose feet are rooted in the landscape of the present. Moving away from professional photography for a second, these are two photos I took. On the left, you can see the famous or infamous Lubumbashi slag heap. On the right is the main employees' hall of Gécamines in Lubumbashi. The photo on the left was actually taken from the steps leading to the front door that you can see on the photo on the right. The inside of that building looks like this, which is called a mess. But this is not a photo I took. Rather, it's by professional photographer Georges Songya. Like Balogi, Songya was born in Lubumbashi, but is just a few years younger. This is part of his series titled Format, for which he visited numerous Gécamines buildings across Katanga and photographed the main gathering halls. Songya was especially interested in the locations where films were screened. In these large halls, select employees of Gécamines could gather to watch films projected on a large screen. These screenings served as a kind of metonym for the role Gécamines played in employees' lives. To rise in the ranks of Gécamines meant you were taken care of. Employees had separate hospitals, housing, swimming pools, and libraries. There is still a separate Gécamines hospital in Lubumbashi. Songya's interest in the film screenings grew out of his own personal memories from growing up in Lubumbashi. He remembers that on any given block, only a few families could afford a TV. Those who could would host screenings in their living rooms, charging neighbors to come and watch a movie or a soccer match. Such locations could advertise themselves on their facades. These neighborhood cinemas have become increasingly rare as televisions have become cheaper. But for this series, Songya went and sought them out. It's as if they're a midway point between the abandoned structures of Lubondo and Balogi's photographs and the lively, packed streets of present Congo. The final artwork I want to share with you is by the artist Michel Maguiema. It is currently on display in the Royal Museum for Central Africa in Tervuren in Belgium. There are 3 photographic portraits of women framed by pen and ink drawings of both images and words. The title of the work in French is Mémoire éveillée entre histoire et histoire individuelle, which she has translated to Éveillée memories from history to herstory. Éveillée is a scientific name for rubber. In both translations, the word history is capitalized, or as we would say in English, it's history with a capital H. She translates histoire individuelle, which would normally be translated to individual histories, she translates it to herstories, a word used mainly to emphasize feminist readings of history. Indeed, in this work, Magema is specifically focused on her maternal line. The center photo is a 1974 studio portrait of Magema's grandmother, named Anne Kilonga, and it was taken in Kinshasa. Inspired by this photograph, which she found among family heirlooms, she decided to take portraits of herself on the left and her mother on the right. The story of this artwork's creation is quite intimate. Magema and her family left Congo in 1984, and the two recent portraits were taken in France. In an interview with me, Magema emphasized that she and her mother do not usually dress like this. To find clothes that could echo those worn by her grandmother, she went through her mother's closet, carefully choosing cloth with patterns that would resonate with those worn by her grandmother. Donning the clothes and sitting in the position of her grandmother felt to Magema like a ritual, honoring her maternal line and connecting generations. The drawings around the portraits connect her personal stories to broader Congolese histories. On the right and left sides, Magema drew words like independence and Zaire, evoking specific time periods in Congolese history and in the lives of those in the photographs. Above and below, she drew images. On this slide, you can see a portrait of Leopold II, who ruled Congo as his personal colony from 1885 to 1908, during which countless Congolese died as the result of violent labor practices and general disregard for human life. At center is a portrait of Mobutu, who took power in 1965 and remained as head of state until 1997. Magema's family had aligned itself with an opposition political party, which led them to flee the country in the 1980s. On the right, her drawing would be recognizable to historians of Congo as the photograph of Molo Ekilite and Nyoka, two boys whose hands were cut off during Leopold's rule in the early 20th century. The specific photograph that Magema is referencing here played a central role in European campaigns against Leopold's rule in Congo, highlighting the ruthlessness of those who ruled in his name. These and the other images framing the portraits exist in the collective memory of many Congolese. Magema is expressing both her personal, individual identity and her shared Congolese identity. Notably, like Lubondo, Magema inserts herself, and particularly her body, into this artwork, and indeed many of the other works she has made throughout her career. All four of the artists whose work I shared with you today unite personal and collective memories. They share stories of their cities, neighborhoods, and families. Contrary to many historical approaches, their work exhibits no divide between colonial and post-colonial periods. Across the last 150 years or so, there is a continuity of governmental indifference, if not outright disdain, for everyday Congolese citizens. The artworks show how policies that an audience from LA might read about in the newspaper affect everyday people across generations. The artists do this in a way that only artists can, with arresting images that reach out and grab you, connecting you to the artwork and the stories that they tell. I hope that this small taste inspires you to seek out Congolese art wherever you may be, to appreciate Congo's complex history and the brilliant creativity of its artists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. This is so interesting to learn about these artists. I want to encourage our audience members to submit questions through the Q&A portal. If you have any burning questions for Elaine, we're going to move into audience Q&A now. And I'd love to ask you a question to get us started, Elaine. Well, first of all, I'm curious to know if you've met any of these artists in person that you were sharing with us today.
Yes, I have actually met all of them, and I should give a shout out. Reason I got to meet most of them and interview them was thanks to a Fowler grant that I received in my last year as a graduate student at UCLA. So I got to visit the Lubumbashi Biennial in 2019. It was curated by Sandrine Collard, another Fowler Lunch and Learn guest. And one thing that was really cool is when I showed those photos by Georges Sangya of format from those big screening rooms, I got to see them displayed inside one of those rooms. It was a cool experience.
Which room was it?
The first one that I showed you, it's like it looks like a big multi-purpose room. It reminds me of elementary school.
Yeah, kind of with the streamers still hanging. Oh, wow, how cool. And so have you been able to stay in touch with the artists?
Yeah, well, especially in preparation for this talk, I asked them if they had good images that I could share.
Oh, great. That's awesome. And so the Lubumbashi Biennial, I was going to ask also, is there like an art hub in DRC, like where most of the art is being created? Is that in Lubumbashi?
I would say it's both in Kinshasa and Lubumbashi. For a while, Lubumbashi very much had a second city syndrome where Kinshasa was getting all the attention because it's a city of maybe 12 million people and Lubumbashi is only 2 million. But it's actually thanks to artist Sami Baloji. He started the Picha Art Center, which started to host this Lubumbashi Biennial, which has really launched the careers of a number of Congolese artists and attracted global attention to the Congolese art scene.
Wow, very cool. And I'd love to know more about how you decided to focus on DRC and like what was your path to becoming a curator and an expert of Congolese art from the DRC?
That is a very long story. I came to UCLA to study with Al and Polly Roberts, professors in world arts and culture / dance, because I wanted to study Luba sculpture. So Baluba people live in Katanga in southeastern DRC. And so my first ever visit there was to Lubumbashi in 2013 to start to scope out possible research. And then while I was there, I also kind of started meeting contemporary artists and learning about what they were up to. Then when I was getting ready for dissertation research, I couldn't go to the rural area I wanted to go to due to a rebellion in the Kasai region. And so based in Brussels, I actually was able to meet a lot of contemporary Congolese artists. I didn't go into this in my little presentation, but 3 out of the 4 artists I talked about, actually everyone but Gosette Lubondo, live part-time or nearly full-time in Europe. Michel Magema lives in France, Sami Baloji lives in Brussels, and Georges Sangya lives partially in Croatia.
Wow.
And so when you're living there, like artists, they're always moving around. They have openings to go to, fancy events. And so I was able to meet a lot of them and start to get to know what they were up to and ask them about it.
Wow, that's so interesting. We actually have some questions now, so we can move to those. Okay, so can you, Isabella Loris Chavez wonders if you can tell us a little bit about how the artists came to the medium of photography and why photography tends to be a popular choice.
Yeah, for 3 of the art, so Gosette Lubondo is the daughter of a photographer. And so she was introduced to photography through her dad. And she tells a story about how there was a party and they asked her to take photos at the party, and that's kind of how it started. Sami Baloji started, I believe, as a like bande dessinée, like he drew cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's actually a long story as to how he started on the Memoir series, where they just found these archival photographs that have been digitized. He started working with Photoshop to create this series and is now known for photography, but also installation and everything. Mm-hmm. And Michel Magema is actually most well known for her video work. Photography and drawing is new for her. But there's also across literature about contemporary African art, there's a lot of talk about how cameras, more than anything, once you have access to a camera, you can start to really become a photographer, and it's like a lower barrier to access than like becoming a painter and needing all these different types of paint, etc.
Thank you. And could you speak on any of the artists whose work you shared about any current projects that they have?
Yeah, I think Gosette Lubondo just had an opening in Kinshasa of her newest work in this photography series, where she explored the now abandoned former palace of Mobutu, which was supposed to be the Versailles of Congo. I've only seen some photos online, but I'm really excited to see it in person.
Is that a continuation of the Imaginary Trip series?
Actually, it's not a part 3, but you can see the similar ideas where she's placing people in the photographs, they're dressing up and inhabiting abandoned spaces. I feel like Sammy is always doing new things. I think if you Google 29 studio productions, you can find out what he's up to. So yeah, they're actually all continuing kind of in this similar vein. I recommend Googling them.
Okay. And Vu is saying this is fascinating, and she's wondering if you can please speak more about artists who emplace their bodies into their images, especially as it relates to their womanhood or notions of feminism in contemporary art.
Yeah, I noticed, it's not a coincidence. I mean, so I noticed that I talked about 2 women artists and 2 male artists, and the 2 women both specifically put their bodies in the photographs and the men do not. I wouldn't say that that's like a generalization you can make across Congolese artwork, but I know for Michelle Magema, she very strongly identifies as a feminist, and a lot of her work, she's thinking through what it means to inhabit a female body and work, and a female Congolese body, and work with that as a medium. So some of her most famous video work is called Oye Oye, and it relates to when, as a child and Mobutu was in power, you would have to march or dance for him in Kinshasa. And she's kind of exploring, like, what does it mean to have control over a human body and make them go where you want them to go and do what you want to do. Wow. So that's one aspect that can be expanded on greatly.
Yeah. And then our last question is one more specific to the Lubondo series. When, like how you spoke about the clothing choices, do you have any information about how Lubondo chose the clothing for her photos, like the red dress and the school uniforms?
I mean, I don't have detailed information about that beyond like she was playing dress up and used what she found. I did look into actually what Magema did for her clothing choices. Because she laughed when she saw this portrait of herself. She was like, oh my God, I'm a maman, which in Congo is like a matronly lady, because she would never dress like that. But she specifically, this is how a lot of women in Congo dress. And the photo of her grandmother was a Kibonguiste, so a follower of Simon Kibongu, in which the female followers are very modest and cover up and cover their hair. And so Michelle Magema like very purposefully had to find pieces of clothing that fit within that way of dressing, which she wouldn't have normally done.
Thank you. Okay, so we do need to wrap up, but I want to share something from Al real quickly. He says, great job. And as an interesting aside, even as Sammy Balogi continues to make art, he's also a grad student developing a dissertation written and art making in Belgium based upon the Lukasa and related Luba mnemonic arts that Polly Roberts studied and taught at UCLA. Good to know. Thanks,
Indeed.
Al. Well, thank you so much, Elaine, for offering your time to us today for this program and your wisdom as well, illuminating the excellent photography and art coming from DRC. And if anyone local has not yet seen the Gosette Lubondo Imaginary Trip exhibition at Fowler Museum, I hope that you will come and give us a visit and see the work soon.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thanks to everyone who joined us. This program's been recorded. It will be available immediately on our Facebook, and in a few days, it will be uploaded to our Instagram and the Fowler website for you to revisit and share. And we hope that you will join us again for our next program. You can find information on the closing slide. And in the meantime, Hope you'll have a great day. See you next time.